Hello ladies, I'm Mrs. Sherman and I have a homemaking blog. I'm making these videos for my blog for homemaker support. So if you have something you need to do that is repetitious and you want something to listen to, you can turn me on and carry me around, and maybe I can keep you company while you work. I know sometimes it's hard, and of course if you are really busy you don't want to watch anything, so please don't watch me, just listen. And I don't have any comments on the YouTube channel because I'd like you to go over to my blog and participate over there. Maybe look at some of my older articles, see what my friends are saying on the sidebar. Go and see some of the other blogs, Women at Home. And this is to support women at home. And by far, the most widely read and looked at and listened to posts that I've had on this series of homemaker support have been anything to do with royalty, the royal home, and royal eating, and royal, to create this feeling of importance in your home so that you have a purpose that is a little higher than just being a homemaker. So today I would like to talk about royally speaking. And you just listen to royalty when they have you ever seen any modern royalty go to perhaps a retirement center where they are patrons of that, and they'll sit there and interview one of the residents there, and ask them how they're doing and how they like it there. And they always say the right things, never a discouraging word. And have you ever, they are trained to say only uplifting things and leaving people feel better. That's the way I do my ladies' Bible class. I want them to feel happier when they leave than when they came. I don't want them to go home feeling depressed. Now, do you ever go into a room, and by the way, I am wearing an apron from Hobby Lobby. They had a tremendous clearance and got rid of all their last season's aprons for just a couple dollars each, and I was happy to get this because it looks like old-fashioned ticking that they used to cover mattresses with. And this has been such a popular fabric, and let me explain why. It's nostalgic. It brings us back to our humble past, and the children's overalls were made out of this also, and the railroad workers wore this kind of fabric, and we're fond of it. It's not very pretty, but we're fond of it. And I also am using my blue teacup to go with, and the dress is an old pattern that I have, but I think that the pattern on this is called Love in a Mist, and I have this growing outside if you've ever seen it. It's a tremendously interesting flower because there are so many varieties that would grow out of one bush, and I find it quite fascinating. And finding blue teacups is difficult, so whenever I get one or someone sends me one, I'm just thrilled because blue is hard to find. You can always find one with a red rose on it, but the blue ones are really, really special. Anyway, part of being royal is to drink your water or tea or whatever you like out of a nice cup, and it makes the day less ordinary. And I believe that life is so short, it's so fleeting. Do you know it's a second away from being over? Just always a second away from being over. And so I don't understand this gloomy view that people have that's very unroyal, that somehow life is just a dress rehearsal, and once you figure it out, you get to do it all over again and do it right. Look, the Queen is not coming, so get your teacups out and use them. And don't forget, I told you last time, your kids don't want your stuff. I think some rare children will want some of your treasured items, but use them because you're not going to get another chance. And test this out and see if what kind of a mood it puts you in. So anyway, have you ever gone to a room in your house that is falling apart? I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I decided to move a small toddler bed from one of my well-appointed rooms and just move it to another room. I can't believe the chaos that this caused. It wrecked 4 other rooms because, you know, the thigh bone's connected to the knee bones, connected to the ankle bone, and it just does that. You know, it's like a well situated puzzle of blocks that are built this way. If you take one of them out, the rest are going to crash. That's the way some houses are. It is the way my house is. Now, I have a ladies' Bible class coming up in the morning, tomorrow morning, so I have about 24 hours counting sleeping time to get those 4 other rooms put back together, which I've made a terrible mess. And so I'm not, can you imagine? I'm going into a room and I'm saying, look at this, I'm doomed. The room is doomed. It's falling apart. And too bad, it's just doomed. How do you think that a parent can raise a child? And I did hear about this. A child, young children are so smart. A young child, his mother was constantly talking about gloom and doom and the end of the world, and life is just futile, life is over, life is bad, everything, the world's falling apart, everything's so awful. And then wanted the little boy to put away some things, put away his toys and help with the housework. He said, well, why should I? It's going to all be over soon. So look, ladies, let's not have any more of that gloom and doom. Can you imagine some royals going around and visiting these places that they patronage and saying, well, it looks like it's all falling apart here. It looks gloom and doom here. What kind of cheerleader is that? And so royal speech involves saying the right thing and keeping people encouraged, and all will be well soon. And also remember, when you get in that feeling that it's all doomed, is it sometimes happens around after 4 o'clock. Seems like things are always, there was a saying, things are always darkest before the dawn. It's always, you always have a low feeling towards the end of the day, and it seems different the next morning. And there seems to be more hope the next morning. So that's why we stop and have tea or take a nap. Is because after a little bit of a rest, after a little bit of a sit down, life seems a little more optimistic. So it doesn't do any good to run people down or to make them feel that life is hopeless. And so let not that gloom and doom be part of your royal speech. The other thing is cursing and swearing. You know, Linda Lichter wrote a book many years ago called Simple Social Graces. I believe it's also, but was republished, called The Benevolence of Manners. And in it, she had categorized the different parts of the Victorian life in the Victorian era from 18 something to 1903. And she had a category about the way that the clothes they wore and why they wore so many clothes, the food they ate, what it was like, why they didn't use recipes, their social life, their children, their houses. And then she had a section on speech, which was so interesting because they believed that if you let speech slide down to being rude, crude, negative, and depressing, that the next thing that would go would be manners. And isn't this the truth? We find that it's easier to hit someone once you start flying the rude words around. And so speech regulates manners. And so we have I have seen and heard such terrible language coming out of, especially ladies and women. There's a difference between women and ladies, of course, but you'll notice my little code when I write on my blog is when I say women, I'm not talking about the refined ladies, I'll just say women. But when I say ladies, it indicates people who are actually living a more refined life. And so even if you're out on a farm or homestead like I am, you can be refined through your speech, and you can be royal. Now, the Bible talks about royalty quite a bit. You remember, of course, the Queen of Sheba that went to see Solomon. She wanted to check out what she had heard about him to see if it was true. And she said she noticed that all of his servants were happy. His land was prosperous. Everything was beautiful, and things ran smoothly. And she noticed this. So, if you want to get to where you feel royal, you're going to have to do that. You're going to have to make your life work well. And one of the things that helps is refined speech. So let not any curse word, and I think it's even safe not to let casual slang come out of your mouth, because in some countries the words you say are actually swear words. For instance, in America, there are some words that are considered terrible curse words that in other countries are just slang. So it's just probably better to cut it out. My father never even spoke slang. I didn't learn it. And so this is what I wanted to say about speech. And so do you look in one of your rooms and you say, all is lost today, we're doomed. And the room is falling apart. And just leave it at that? No, you set it aright. You make it pleasant for yourself and for others. So instead of going through life saying, all is lost, you remember there were old fables that would give you examples of characters that would say all is lost, and they didn't get anywhere because all they said was, well, it's over. So you cannot do that, because in the New Testament it indicates that we're supposed to be found working, and that life can come to an end, but we're supposed to work until the end. We're supposed to improve things and do your best to serve the Lord and have a clear conscience. So you cannot go through your life as a homemaker in a gloomy and dooming way. I hear so many people saying, well, life is so bad, and it's so bad out there, and all that. And one of the things you can do to keep your mind more positive is stay away from bad reports. Stay away from gloomy reports. So never a discouraging word. And Romans 12, just read that aloud. If I had it here, I would read it to you. But notice how the apostle instructs in Romans 12 to be patient in suffering, and to, as far as possible, get along with all people. Don't return evil for evil. It's a beautiful passage, and I should have memorized it by now. But read that, because in a very, very positive way that sends you packing and sends you working and sends you doing something worthwhile. And instead of just blanket saying, the world's a terrible place, you're just going to have to accept it. You make life better for you. And that's what royalty does too. They make life better for themselves and better for others. And the Bible speaks often of royalty and nobility. If you want to look that up sometime, what does the Bible mean by the word nobility? Because it talks about whatever is noble. Think on these things. And so I want to also talk about how to identify. This is a different subject, but it's also on language and on royal speech, because it's in the Bible. The Bible calls members of the Lord's church and those who have obeyed the gospel and become Christians as the royal priesthood. So they're royal, and I've always been quite fascinated with that word, that it's okay to behave as though we are royal. And royalty does not stoop to certain common things. So they're not allowed to, for instance, fly into a rage or swear at people, and they have to dress a certain way. And as I told you also, the lady that wrote Simple Social Graces was talking about how also connecting the language to the manners, but also to the dress, that once the language would fall downhill, and not just crude language, but depressing, sardonic sort of lost all hope. I remember one time when we were much younger, we were completely out of money, and my husband was whistling, and I said, "What's going on? Don't you know we're doomed and we've lost all this money?" And he said, "Well, somehow life gets better when you've lost all hope." And so, but anyway, this woman suggested in this book that when the language goes downhill, the manners go downhill, and so does the dress, the mode of dress. It'd be less formal. When your language is less formal, your code of living is less formal, and your clothing will be less formal. And so, let me tell you something else, how this affects this kind of boomerangs. And one is that I lived in an era before the clothing went totally misshapen downhill, just throw anything on, no style, no structure, no color. I lived in the era when that had ended and the other began, where I used to call it slop chick. Now it's not even chick, it's slop. Would you arrange women at home do not want messy houses or ugly houses. They want it all to be nice. They want it chic. They want it to make them feel good. They want it to be cheerful when they walk in the room. And yet they will dress themselves in clothing that's so different from that feeling they want in their home. But your home is just the same. I mean, your clothing should reflect how you feel about your home too. It's dressed for your home. You know, if you would not throw an ugly old thing on your floor or your couch, why do you want to throw it on yourself? Why do you want to wear these depressing clothes? And I noticed also, because this sort of changed, and this happened in the early 60s, when everything got so much more casual as far as clothing went and speech, that as the clothing got more ugly, women got more depressed. And so then there was this whole culture of feeling down and feeling depressed, and then they would try to alleviate it in other ways. When back in the 50s, if you felt a little bit down, you'd buy a new hat. And I've told you about this before, that and then you could change your hat, you could redecorate it. My computer is very old, and I'm waiting to get it transferred to another one, and it's blinking. So, so your mood has to stay high, because if you want royal speech in your home, you're going to have to be the leader in that. And the Bible talks about this. It says in the New Testament, "Let no corrupt speech come out of your mouth." Well, in my opinion, it doesn't just have to be cursing or swearing or corrupt or dirty jokes or things like that. It can just be gloomy. And gloomy speech is not a good thing. People will flee far. Of course, misery loves company. Maybe they won't flee far from you. Maybe you can gather a group together and just gripe. But so now I want to take a little bit of time. I don't know how much I have been here, but I want to take a little bit of time to talk about figures of speech in the Bible. And hopefully you aren't just sitting here looking at me. You are just working. So let's talk about figures of speech in the Bible. So much of the Bible is figurative speech, especially the New Testament, and it's so fascinating. So we need to acquaint ourselves with it, and we did study this in ladies' class. Now, why should we as ladies want to do this? Well, first of all, in church, I'm married to a preacher, and his sermons are designed for everybody. So you're not, as ladies have special needs, we find it interesting to sit and sift through a little more carefully some of the scriptures and apply them to our lives at home. And it isn't just Titus 2, it's the whole Bible that benefits us as women and helps us to help our children and our families and our husbands. So we need to know some of these things. Especially, a woman has to guide the home and guard the home and keep false doctrine out. And even your husband, even a minister, can start to slide and listen to things that aren't quite scriptural. So we need to know these things. So If we interpret figurative language as though it were literal, or literal language as though it is figurative, we'll miss all the meaning of the passage. So let's go through this figurative language and how to find it. A simile. Now, simile is the word, comes from the word similar. So when something is or as, it has the word is or as in it, or like, it can be a simile. So 1 Peter 1:24, all flesh is as grass, and all the glory thereof as the flower of grass. So, and Christ used a striking simile in describing hypocrites in Matthew 23:27. Ye are like unto whited sepulchres, which outwardly appear beautiful, but inwardly they are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanliness. So simile and similitude are the two things I'm going to talk to you about today, to go with royal speech and never a discouraging word. We're losing our figures of speech in our everyday language. Every culture has their own figures of speech. Like, for instance, we would say, I want you kids now, we need to hit the road. And that just meant we need to get in the car and get going on our trip. And so that was a figure of speech. But now we have a bunch of literalists around that aren't enjoying the language, and they're great about swearing and cursing and talking dirty and trash talk. But when it comes to figures of speech, oh, that's not honest. You know, we don't literally hit the road. So you've got to say, we need to get in the car and go. But these figures of speech are designed to put a little bit more enjoyment and meaning into life. And they're all through the Bible. So let's go to the next one, and that's a similitude. It's a drawn out or prolonged simile. Jesus contrasts the man who builds on the rock and the man who builds on the sand, and likens them to an obedient hearer or a disobedient hearer. Matthew 7:24-27. So I'll do those two, and then next time I come, well, let me just read a few more. The metaphor. Now, we have a lot of our own sayings at home. Let me just I'll tell you a story. One of the things that happen, and you will collect them as you become a homemaker and as you're home and your children are around you and your husband, and you start collecting your own culture and you start creating your own figures of speech. And we have one, and I have quoted it several times or put it in my newsletters, and it's called We've Saved Everything since 1952 or 1982. Well, this began back in the day. My husband has been a preacher since he was very young, 18, and he always wore a suit jacket. But he noticed that during a sermon, and the sermons are usually 20 minutes, that his voice would feel a little bit, his throat would feel a little bit dry. So what he would do was he would unwrap a throat lozenge. He liked that Ricola that was the honey flavored, or the, you know, all those natural things, and he would unwrap it and stick it in his suit coat pocket, and that way he wouldn't make any noise when he was in the middle of his sermon, and he could get the little cough drop out and just kind of slip it into his mouth, and nobody would see it from the audience. So he had this habit from the time he was very young. Well, and of course we've always lived in these country places, and there are no dry cleaners, and the suits were only worn 2 hours on a Sunday. So those suits would hang in the closet for a long time, often with some of those old cough drops in there. And when the children came along, they noticed him unwrapping these things and putting them in his suit pocket, and they got in on it. They knew that on Sunday morning they would have a dry throat, and they'd ask Papa for a throat lozenge, a cough drop, and they could get one. So he would unwrap some new ones and stick them in there for the children too. So after a while, and after quite a few years, of course, we don't have a dry cleaner, and I never went through his pockets I wasn't interested. I've got too much to do myself, so I never I never cleaned out the pockets. And there were those throat lozenges, and he was still using them, but they had collected all the lint from the pocket. And so when the children got older, they started to discover this, and they said, Papa, I need a throat lozenge, but please, Papa, I don't want one from 1952. I don't want one of those ones you have from 1952. So that's where we got the expression. And I will ask him sometimes, do you have a pencil? Do you have a pen? Because he collects all these old-fashioned writing instruments. And I'll say, but I don't want one from 1952 because I know the eraser is going to have all that lint on it. And that's a standing joke in our family, and it's a figure of speech. So, but of course, you know, the critics love to criticize you and call you a liar because that throat lozenge might not have been from 1952 exactly, but it's a figure of speech, kids. Some people just need to grow up. So now we're going to go on to metaphor. A metaphor is a comparison reduced to a single word expressing a similarity without the signs of comparison. The simile says that it is like it. The metaphor says it is it. It's still a figure of speech. For example, in Luke 13:31-32, Jesus said of Herod, "Go and say to that fox." If Jesus had said, "Go and tell that man that is like a fox," it would have been a simile, but Jesus uses a metaphor for more forceful emphasis. So I had a long argument with somebody one time. It's just so futile to talk to people who don't understand language and figures of speech. And they'd be better off if they did. They'd be happier. So like I have a friend who, we all live in the country, and sometimes we don't stop at the stop signs. We don't notice them. There's a bush growing over them or something. And I had a lady that I was riding with one time, and we were going to go visit someone, and she drove through a road past another road, and she says, "Oh, I didn't see the stop sign. It must have had a bush growing over it. I'll stop twice at the next one." And these are just humorous figures of speech and sayings that we collect, and that's how we develop our own culture, and that's how we create bonding in our own families, is having our own speech. So there's another metaphor. Ye are the temple of God. Matthew 26:26-28. This is the blood of my covenant. How many controversies on the Lord's Supper would be settled if we realize that this is metaphorical language. So let me just go on to one more called the allegory. And since we're talking about royal speech, I think it's better to have these figures of speech in your language than to have all the trash talk and cursing. Allegory. An allegory is a figurative, I always think of the word, it says allegory, and the word ori, it's a story. It rhymes with story. That's what an allegory is. It's a figurative application of a story or a narrative. It is described by another subject resembling it. Now, the reason that Christ used these figures of speech was to coax reluctant hearers by comparing something to something else so that they could understand it, by comparing something earthly with something heavenly so that they could understand it, putting it side by side. So an allegory is a figurative sentence or discourse in which the principal subject is described by another subject resembling it in its properties and circumstances. A classic example is Galatians 4:21, where we as Isaac are children of the promise and of the free woman, illustrating the difference between the Old and New Testament. Another example is the Christian armor in Ephesians 6:11-17, as it describes our fight against sin and Satan. So, ladies, think about royal speech. Think about being royally speaking, and think about your role in the home as an ambassador to everyone around you, to your children, to your husband, as an ambassador of of a royal attitude, and uh, think about leaving people feeling better, and always uplifting them instead of leaving them feeling depressed. And there's nothing more depressing than to be talking to someone and they start arguing and they start saying, yeah, but that doesn't always work. Yeah, but that you're trying to have this nice polite conversation and they'll say, yeah, but that's not and you just feel, you sort of start to feeling the cords of your heart being pulled down. We want them to feel happier and uplifted and giving them some hope. So there is hope, and as long as we are alive, we can have royal speech and we can do something about something, can't we? So don't go through your homemaking with a very sour dour attitude, because I don't think any royal person would be allowed to do that. They're not allowed to look at a place and condemn it. So ladies, until next time, I hope that this has been beneficial to you. And if it hasn't, go find somebody that you like, will agree with you, and something different. You might need something different. I understand that. That's why there are so many different people in the world. And I will put a picture of some of the products that I used today on the web, and I've had some comments that the picture of my face is so washed out and that I'm so pale. It's this old computer that I'm using, so I'm hoping things will improve. I'm not really that white. So I will say thank you if you will please leave a comment. Give me a list of things you'd like to hear, and if I can do it, I will. And until then, God bless and have a lovely day. Goodbye.